They told me Earth was already dead. The Conquered put it in writing, a clean little notice stamped and sealed sent out to every port in the sector. World designation Human 3, quarantined, non-member, aid prohibited under sanitary cordon law, do not approach, do not assist, let it run its course. I still have that notice somewhere. I kept it. I don't know why. Maybe so that on the days I doubt myself, I can read it again and remember exactly what kind of thing I refuse to obey. I'm old now. My hands shake when I lift a cup. The young ones on this station call me grandfather even though I never had children. They bring me warm broth and they think I'm sweet and a little simple. They don't know what I did. They don't ask. That's fine. I'm not telling this for them. I'm telling it because I knew Earth before the rest of you did. Before it became a name spoken with respect. Before the songs. I knew it when it was just a sick little planet that everyone had decided to forget. Let me start where it really started. My people are called the Maru. You probably haven't heard of us and that's all right. We were never important. No fleets, no banks, no seat at the table. We hauled cargo. We fixed things other people broke. We lived in the gaps between the big powers, the way small fish live between the legs of something larger that hasn't decided yet whether it's hungry. My family had one ship, an old freighter, the kind that groans when you push it. We called her the patient thing, because she always got where she was going eventually, and never in a hurry. I ran grain mostly. Seed grain, medical stock, water filters, boring runs. The kind of work nobody fights over, which is exactly why I was near Earth's sector the season everything fell apart. You have to understand what happened to that planet, because most of you only know the ending. A blight came through on a relay, not a weapon, just an accident, the dumbest kind of disaster, a contaminated shipment that should have been screened and wasn't. It got into Earth's soil before anyone understood what it was. Their crops started turning gray at the root, whole fields in a season. Then the next season nothing came up at all. Earth in those days couldn't grow its food anywhere but on Earth. They had no off-world farms, no orbital stock to fall back on. One bad world, one bad year, and a few billion people start doing the math on how long they have left. So they asked for help. They did it properly too. They sent the request through every channel they could reach, polite, desperate, formal. They offered everything they had. And the Conquered looked at them and saw a non-member world with a contamination event and a population that couldn't pay, and they did the cheapest thing in the universe. They drew a line around the whole planet and called it a quarantine. They said it was to stop the blight spreading. Maybe part of them even believed that. But I've lived long enough to know the truth. A quarantine is just a polite word for a locked door. They weren't protecting the galaxy from Earth. They were protecting themselves from having to care. I heard about it in a portside canteen, the way you hear about anything, half rumor and half complaint. A trader 2 tables over was laughing about it, said the humans were begging, said they'd offered their art, their music, recordings of their whole history as payment. Imagine that, he said, selling your grandmother's voice for a sack of seed. Everyone laughed. I didn't. I want to tell you I had some noble reason. I didn't, not really. I had a hold full of seed grain that a buyer 3 systems over had just canceled on me, and a planet full of people who needed exactly that, and a stamped notice telling me to leave them to die. That's all. Sometimes a choice is just 2 things lined up next to each other, and you, sitting in the middle, deciding which one you can live with. I went back to the patient thing that night, and I sat in the dark of the cockpit for a long time. Breaking a cordon wasn't a fine. It was a license gone, ship seized. For a Maru with 1 freighter, that was the whole life. Everything my family had built, 4 generations of it, all of it riding on whether I turned left or right out of that port. I thought about my mother. She'd run that ship before me. She used to say the Maru survive because we're too small to bother killing and too useful to throw away. Stay small, she'd tell me. Stay quiet. Don't make them notice you. She was right. That's exactly how we survived. I turned left. The route to Earth was ugly. You couldn't go in clean, not with a cordon picket sitting on every approved lane. So I went the way smugglers go, through a dead system with a collapsed beacon, where the navigation was bad and the dust would hide a small ship from a lazy scan. The patient thing wasn't built for it. She complained the whole way. Something in the rear coupling started a tick, tick, tick that I never did fully fix, and I'd lie in my bunk listening to it like a heartbeat I didn't trust. I had a lot of time on that run to be afraid. I used most of it. When I finally came out of the dust and saw the planet for the first time, I almost turned around. I'd seen pictures of Earth before. Blue, they always said. The blue planet. But that wasn't what I saw. What I saw was a world wrapped in a sick brown haze, dust the wind had kicked up off all those dead fields and never let settle. The blue was still there, the oceans, but they looked gray under the murk, like something behind frosted glass. There were lights on the night side, scattered, dimmer than they should have been. A planet trying to keep the power on while it starved. And there, between me and the planet, sitting in a slow orbit like a guard dog asleep at a gate, was a conquered cordon cutter. A warship, small by their standards, big enough to end me in a breath. I had a decision to make, and about 4 seconds to make it. I could run. The dust was right behind me. I could slip back in, go home, file the buyer's cancellation, lick my wounds and live, stay small, stay quiet. Or I could do the stupidest thing Amaru has ever done. I opened a channel, not to the cutter, to the planet. Wide open, no encryption, the way you'd shout into a dark room. "This is the freighter patient thing," I said. My voice came out thinner than I wanted. "I'm carrying seed grain and medical stock. I know you've been told no one is coming. Someone's coming. I'm coming. Tell me where you want it." Then I waited, and I have never in my whole long life waited the way I waited in those next few seconds. The cutter woke up. Of course it did. I watched it turn, slow and certain, and bring its nose around toward me, and a light bloomed on its hull that I knew meant a weapon waking up. And then from the planet, through the static, a voice came back. A human voice. A woman, tired in a way I could hear across all that distance. "Patient thing," she said. "This is Earth, we hear you." And then, softer, like she didn't quite believe she was saying it. "You came." I've thought about that moment more times than I can count. 2 words. You came. Not thank you, not who are you, just the simple shock of it. The shock that someone, anyone, had heard them and decided they were worth the trip. I didn't know yet what it would cost me. I didn't know about the standoff coming, or the long years after, or the thing that would happen so many seasons later that it would make all of this worth it 100 times over. All I knew right then was that a planet full of strangers had stopped believing anyone was coming. And I was about to prove them wrong. Part 2. The cutter hailed me before I'd even closed the channel with the planet. I'd never spoken to a conquered officer in my life. We didn't move in the same rooms, so I wasn't ready for the voice. It was calm. That was the worst part. Not angry, not threatening. Calm, the way you'd speak to a child who'd wandered somewhere they shouldn't. "Unregistered freighter. You are inside a sanctioned cordon. Reverse your approach and hold for boarding. Comply and your case will be processed with leniency." Leniency. I almost laughed. There's a special kind of cruelty in being offered mercy by the people who built the cage. I didn't reverse. I kept going, slow, steady. The way you walk past a sleeping animal hoping it stays asleep. The planet was below me now, close enough that I could see the dust storms turning over the dead farmland like slow gray water. "Freighter, this is your second instruction. You are carrying contaminated biological material into a quarantine zone. You are a vector. Reverse now, or you will be treated as a hostile." A vector, that was the lie they'd built the whole wall out of. The seed in my hold was clean, screened, sealed. They knew it. I knew it. But if they called me a vector, then stopping me wasn't cruelty. It was hygiene. That's how the big powers do their worst things. They find the right word first, and then the thing they do afterward looks almost reasonable. I keyed the channel, My mouth was dry. "I've got clean seed and clean medicine," I said. "Scan it yourself. You know it's clean. You're not stopping a plague, you're stopping food." Silence, a long one. And while it stretched out, something happened that I will remember until the day my heart finally gives up. The planet started answering. Not the woman this time. Ships. Little ones. They came up out of the haze in ones and twos from spaceports I hadn't even known were still working. Patched together things. Old orbital shuttles. Cargo lifters with their lifting arms still bolted on because nobody'd had the parts to remove them. A couple of them were trailing vapor from seals that should have been replaced years ago. They were the saddest excuse for a fleet I'd ever seen. And they put themselves between me and the cutter. Not in formation. They didn't know how. They just came up and spread out, this ragged screen of junk and hope, and sat there in the cold between a warship and a freighter full of grain. I couldn't speak. I just watched them on my screen, these clumsy little ships, and I thought, what are you doing? You can't stop that thing. One shot and you're gas. The cutter thought the same. It hailed again, and now the calm had an edge to it. "Human vessels, you are obstructing a quarantine enforcement action. Clear the approach immediately or you will be fired upon. This is not a negotiation." And then a new voice came on the channel, and this one I'd know anywhere even now. A man, older, steady in a way that made the cutter's calm sound like a child playing at it. "Cordon vessel, this is Earth Orbital Control. My name's Joseph Akafer. I'm the one you'll be talking to." A pause. "You want to fire on a relief convoy, go ahead. But you should know we're broadcasting this. Every word. Wide band, unencrypted, the whole sector's listening. So when you pull that trigger, you're not stopping a vector. You're a warship gunning down farmers and a grain hauler in front of the entire galaxy. And everyone's going to know your name." I sat very still. Because that, right there, was the thing none of us small folk ever dared to do. We stayed quiet so they wouldn't notice us. And this man, this Joseph Akafer, on a dying planet with a junk fleet, was doing the exact opposite. He was making sure the whole universe was watching. He was betting his life and the lives of everyone behind him on a single idea, that the conquered cared more about how a thing looked than whether it was true. It was the bravest stupid thing I'd ever seen, braver than what I'd done. I'd taken a gamble in the dark, alone, where nobody would see me fail. He was standing in the light on purpose with his name on it. The cutter didn't answer. Seconds went by. The little ships held their line. I could see one of them close to me now, a stubby old shuttle, and through its forward port I could actually see the pilot. A young woman. She had her hands on the controls and she wasn't moving and she wasn't looking away. I'll never forget her face. She was terrified. Anyone would be. And she stayed anyway. That's the thing nobody tells you about courage. It doesn't look brave from the inside. It just looks like staying when everything in you is screaming to go. The weapon light on the cutter's hull was still glowing. And then slowly it went dark. The cutter's voice came back one last time, clipped now. The calm was gone and something colder had replaced it. "Freighter, be advised, your registration is logged. Your license is forfeit, your vessel is marked. You will not trade in conquered space again. This act will follow you for the rest of your life." "Understood," I said. "Make your delivery," the cutter said, and the word delivery came out like something rotten it wanted off its tongue. "And get out of our sector." Then it turned, that big quiet warship, and it pulled away into a higher orbit, and it sat there and watched because it couldn't leave, but it wouldn't stop me either. It had been beaten by an old man with a microphone and a wall of junk ships and a whole galaxy listening in. I want to tell you the delivery was the triumphant part. It wasn't. It was just work. Hard, exhausting, beautiful work. They brought me down to a spaceport outside a city whose name I couldn't pronounce then and can say perfectly now. The field was cracked. Weeds in the seams, except the weeds were gray too, dying like everything else. And the people. They lined the edge of the field, thousands of them, and they were quiet. Not cheering. Just watching the patient thing come down with her tick, 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 watching the ship that had come when no one would. When the cargo doors opened and they saw the grain, that's when the sound started. It wasn't a cheer. It was something lower and rower than that. A whole crowd of people letting out a breath they'd been holding for a year. I stayed 3 days. I helped unload because I couldn't stand still. An old woman pressed a piece of bread into my hands, real bread, made from the last good flour they'd saved, and she wouldn't take it back no matter how I tried. A child touched my face, just to see if I was real. The young pilot from the shuttle found me and didn't say anything. She just gripped my hand in both of hers and held it. And Joseph Acaffer came and sat with me on the cargo ramp on the last night. 2 tired old men from 2 different worlds, and he said something I've carried ever since. "They'll punish you for this," he said. "You know that." "I know." He nodded slowly. He looked out at his people moving sacks of grain in the dark by lamplight. "We don't forget," he said. "Whatever they take from you, you remember that. Humans are short-lived and we're stubborn and we are not good at much, but we don't forget who showed up." He turned and looked at me. "You showed up." I left the next morning. The crowd was there again at the edge of the field. And as the patient thing lifted, with her bad coupling ticking and her empty hold, I looked down and saw something I didn't understand at the time. They were holding up lights, every one of them. Thousands of small lights lifted toward me as I climbed away from their wounded planet. I didn't know it then, but they were already keeping a promise. Part 3. The cutter was telling the truth. The punishment followed me. I lost my license the day I got home. The patient thing was impounded at the first conquered port I tried to enter, and they kept her. 4 generations of my family, sitting in an impound yard, slowly turning to scrap. I never saw her again. I heard later they sold her for parts. The Maru elders weren't kind about it either. I'd done the one thing we were never supposed to do. I'd made them notice us. For a while, every Maru ship got searched twice as long at every port, and they all knew whose fault it was. I was a problem. A shame. "Stay small," my mother had said. "Stay quiet." And I'd stood up and shouted and brought the big power's attention down on all of us. So I went quiet a different way. I took work where I could find it, off the books, the lowest kind. I got old in a series of borrowed bunks. The years went by the way they do, faster the more of them you have. Earth recovered, slowly, then not so slowly. I heard about it in pieces. They beat the blight. They built off-world farms so it could never happen again. They grew. By the time my hands started to shake, Earth wasn't a sick little quarantine world anymore. It was a name people said with a kind of careful respect. They'd remembered how close they came to dying, and they'd built themselves into something that would never be that helpless again. I was proud of them in a quiet way, but I figured the story was over. They'd moved on. Why would they remember one broken-down Maru and his grain run? People forget. That's the most ordinary thing in the universe. Then the flare came. It was my world this time, the Maru homeworld. Our sun, the old red one we'd circled for all of history, threw off something the astronomers had never seen it do. A flare, but wrong, a slow, violent thing that didn't stop. It cooked the upper atmosphere. It poisoned the orbital stations. It was going to scour the surface within the season, and there was nowhere for the Maru to go. We had ships, but we were small. We had never built for this. We could maybe save 1 in 20 of our people. Maybe. So we asked for help, the way Earth once had, properly, formally, desperately. And the conquered looked at us, a minor people with no fleet and no bank and no seat at the table, and they did the cheapest thing in the universe. They expressed their deep regret. They cited the cost. They cited the distance. They cited a dozen reasons that all meant the same single thing. No. I was an old man by then. I sat in a crowded shelter on a poisoned world, and I listened to that refusal, and I laughed, because what else do you do? I had spent my whole life paying for the crime of helping people the powerful had abandoned, and now here I was, abandoned, and the joke was finally complete. I thought, this is how it ends then. Quietly. The way it was always going to. I should have remembered what Joseph Acaffer told me on that cargo ramp. The ships came out of the dark 4 days later. I was outside when it happened, looking up at our angry sun the way you look at something that's killing you, and the sky filled with light. Not flare light, engine light. Hundreds of them, then thousands. Coming down out of orbit in long ordered lines, nothing like the junk fleet I remembered. These were sleek and enormous, and they moved like they belonged to people who had decided with their whole hearts to be somewhere. Earth ships. A human fleet, bigger than the Concords, descending on my dying world with their holds open and their medical bays lit. And not one conquered vessel dared come close enough to say a word about it. I stood there and I cried like a child, an old fool standing in the poisoned wind, crying, while strangers' grandchildren came down from the sky to save my people. A young woman found me, a human in a flight suit with a translator clipped to her collar. She'd been going down the line of shelters reading off a list, and she stopped in front of me and checked her tablet twice, and then she looked up at me with the strangest expression. "Are you," she said carefully, working through the syllables of my name, my real Maru name, the one humans had never been able to say. She got it right. She'd practiced it. "Are you the one they called the patient thing?" I couldn't speak. I nodded. She put her hand to her mouth, and then she turned and called out to the others, and I heard my name, my old ship's name, pass down that line of human rescuers like something sacred. They came over. More of them. They gathered around an old broken Maru in the dust, and they looked at me the way you'd look at a story you'd grown up hearing and never thought you'd touch. "You don't understand," the young woman said, and her eyes were wet now too. "We learn about you in school, the freighter that came when the whole galaxy said no. There's a," she laughed, embarrassed, wiping her face. "There's a statue, on the field where you landed. It's you. We grew up with you." I asked her because I had to. "Why did you come? It's been so long. Why would you come all this way for us?" And she looked at me like I'd asked why the sun comes up. Like the answer was so simple it almost hurt. "Because you came," she said. "When no one else would, you came for us." She took my hand in both of hers, exactly the way that frightened young pilot had all those years ago in a different sky. "We never forgot. We were always going to come. We've been ready for years. We just needed to know where you were." They saved us. Not 1 in 20. All of us. Every Maru on that world, lifted off and carried to safety on human ships, because a planet of short-lived, stubborn people had made a promise in lamplight a lifetime ago and had spent generations keeping it. I'm old now, like I said. I live on a human station, among people who bring me broth and call me grandfather. Sometimes one of the children asks me to tell the story, and I do, and they listen with their mouths open, and at the end they always ask the same thing. They ask if I was scared that day, turning toward Earth alone with a warship in the way. I tell them yes, I was terrified. I was a small person from a small people, and everything in me said to stay quiet and stay safe. And then I tell them the only thing I really know, the thing it took me a whole life to understand. The galaxy is full of powers who count what a thing costs before they decide whether to care. They will always have their reasons. The reasons will always sound clean. But somewhere down the line, every one of us is the small, sick world that everyone has agreed to forget, waiting in the dark to find out if anyone is coming. I was lucky. I found out the answer is sometimes yes. So when it's your turn to choose, and it will be your turn, don't ask what it costs. Just go, just be the one who came. They never forget who came.